Let's see, you have to. Yeah, I think that'd be safe. Be down and drive it out there. Drive back. Who else are we thinking? What the heck? Is that 29?
Probably 24.
Oh no, are you serious?
Check on Victor.
Okay, no, it is 29.
Probably we got change it to 24.
Yeah, I think we actually graded the wrong guy's test. There's no way I got 29. I'm doing straight.
You graded on somebody else's test?
No, I'll never do that.
What do you say like
I
those?
hope you're not trying to get in the national honor society.
That's why
They
I
charge that, Miss Gross.
So yes. Are you gonna like avoid something? Are you mixing me happy where I can't do it now?
I don't know, did you apply for it?
I really yes.
Seems like something I should tell her about.
Well, look, this is not handwriting. This is.
Well, then what were you saying?
I just kind of surprising that I got a 29.
What was the part about this is somebody else's quiz?
Like, there's no way I got 29 of these correct.
You thought you got more correct,
I
or
got them all wrong when I turned it into you. No, I'm just like, I'm really happy.
Jackson, do you want to make up your quiz in the hallway? Jackson, you want to make up your quiz in the hallway?
Yes, sir.
No, he's not. No, you're
Just I'm gonna have to send you out in the hallway anyway. I threw away the one you had started because you had barely looked at it. So. Yeah, just shut the door. There should be a desk out there. If there's not, let me know. I can take you there.
I don't know.
All right, guys. Did y'all hear the bell? 3.
Yeah, it's okay, that's cool. Mason, what do you think?
I don't know. I told him what I said the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Guys, y'all need to sit down, please.
I won't be here tomorrow.
Okay. So you'll miss the test.
Yeah, so I might just have to make that up for spring break.
I guess so. Yeah. You won't be here. 1, 2. Jackson is here. Evie's not. All right, guys. So last time I saw you, we were in the other classroom, and we took, or I gave you time to study for your 3.2 quiz, and you took your 3.2 quiz, which is the last piece of this section, or at least this half of the section. We used to do all of this together as 100-point tests, and now we do it as 2 50-point tests. So tomorrow we will have our test over 3.1 and 3.2, and maybe a little bit of 1.9, but about half of your test will be from section 3.1, exponential functions, and roughly half of your test will come from 3.2, logarithmic properties and logarithmic graphs. So I passed those quizzes back to you. Those should have been on your desk when you guys came in. So I'll give you a minute to start looking them over, but I'm going to take questions in the order that the agenda says. So make sure that you look at your 1.9 quiz first before you move on to the other one, because that's the first one I'll take questions from. Then look at your 3.1 quiz next, and then finish with your 3.2 quiz. So similar to how we did last semester, the most important thing to help you prepare for your test will be the quiz questions. Anything that was on the quiz is almost guaranteed to be on the test. The second most important thing would be the test review. So the test review is what I had y'all pick up on your way in, and I need to give you a little bit of information on this one. So make sure you're paying attention here, otherwise you're going to be confused and not know what's going on this. This review is over sections 1.9, it doesn't say that in the top left, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. We have not done 3.3 or 3.4 yet. That's the second half of this unit that we do after spring break. So there are some questions on this test review that you do not need to worry about for tomorrow's test. So if you're not listening to me and you're not jotting these questions down that I'm about to tell you in a second, then you might be working on this at home tonight, think that you don't know something that you're supposed to know, and you're gonna unnecessarily stress out. So I switched the agenda here. I probably should have put it on y'all as well, but my 8A class did this a while back. So on the very bottom of the agenda part, you only need to be worried about questions 1 through 9, 11, and 13. Those are the only questions on the test review that would be a red flag if you are not doing them correctly.
Wait, you said those are the ones we will have on our test on the study, or the ones we need to?
No, those are the ones you need to be able to do.
Okay, gotcha.
Those are the ones you should do before tomorrow.
Gotcha.
So 1 is about graphing exponential functions. 2 is about the horizontal asymptote stuff we did in 3.1. Number 3 is about compound interest from 3.1. 4, 5, and 6 are about logarithmic properties from 3.2. Number 7 is logarithmic graph from 3.2. 8 is knowing about the inverse of exponentials and graphing logarithms like 3.2. And 11 and 13 are about evaluating logarithms like 3.2. The other questions you may remember how to do from Algebra 2, so that's great if you want to try them. But again, last year I had a handful of people who didn't hear that part, and they sent me emails worried about, like the back page and not knowing how to do something. So if you're not listening, that's why you're going to be confused. So. Okay, so let me pause here for just 1 minute, and then I'll take questions. Let me put this back. I'll take questions from your 1.9 quiz, if you have any. Again, this would be the least important of the 3, but anything that was on a quiz is certainly fair game for your test. And if people have some questions on the 1.9 quiz that you don't need help with, just try to work a question or two from the test review while you wait. And then same for the 3.1 and 3.2. As people ask stuff that doesn't apply to you, just use your time well and work on the test review.
I'm not gonna be here tomorrow on Friday. So what do you want me to do for the test?
You'll have to make it up after spring break,
Okay, that works.
but you should probably write yourself a reminder
Okay.
to review before you come back.
So while advisory, I'll come in advisory, or like a class period, I'll just go outside.
During advisory,
Okay.
always during advisory. I'm assuming when we come back Monday will be no movement, so it'll probably be Tuesday.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, so just from 1.9 first, if you have a question from that you'd like me to talk about or review you on, you just need to tell me which form you had, which would be near the top right, and what question it is. Anything from 1.9 that you would be worried about being on the test.
Can you do number 3, form B?
1.9, number 3, form B. Okay, so this is the one that gave you a function. And then ask you to find the inverse and the domain of the inverse. Okay, so one thing, just so you understand why this part's on there, if you think about what this graph looks like, this is going to look like x squared shifted down 9. This is not 1-to-1, and because this function is not 1-to-1, he doesn't have an inverse function. So the reason that there's that part that says where x is greater than or equal to 0 is just a fancy way to say let's only look at that part of the function. And now it is 1-to-1 and there is an inverse function. So that's why that's there, so that mathematically this question makes sense. Okay, but to find an inverse function, you just need to remember that inverse means you're swapping input with output. And then solve by undoing the -9 with the +9 and undoing a square with the square root. So that was 2 of the points. Now, there's a couple different ways you could do this one. If you know what this graph looks like, I'm going to show a lot of optional stuff here, but you should know what the square root of x graph looks like, and then the +9 would shift it left 9. So, if you think of that graphically, you can see the domain is from -9 to infinity. That's one way that you could get that. Another way would be to realize that if you know what this guy's graph looks like, and we only kept this part of it, the range of the function is the same as the domain of the inverse. So the range of that is also -9 to infinity. Who is this? You? Who is this?
Miss Dawn?
Oh, Miss Dawn. Okay, so you okay with where that came from?
Oh, yes, sir.
And the benefit is, obviously, nobody said you had to graph this function, nobody said you had to graph your answer, but notice if you do, you can see this line of symmetry at y equals x, which should make you feel better about that answer. So there's a little bit of a benefit for doing it, even though it didn't ask you to. Okay. What else from 1.9?
Can you do number 7, the last one on Form B?
I'd be happy to. Okay. Number 7 from Form B. Come up with an odd function. So odd tells me that it needs to be symmetric with respect to the origin. So whatever graph you came up with, you should be able to turn your paper upside down and it still should look the same. And it is supposed to, well, it does say function, an odd function, which means the vertical line test has to pass. But the inverse is it's not supposed to have an inverse function. So horizontal line test needs to fail. To be a function, it's got to pass the vertical line test. To not have an inverse function, the horizontal line test has to fail, and to be odd, it has to be symmetric to the origin. So the one that we had talked about would be something like this. That's symmetric to the origin because the graph looks the same this way or upside down. He's a function because it passes the vertical line test, but he clearly fails the horizontal line test. So that's one example. Some people also did the sine graph. If you remember what the sine graph looks like, sine is an odd function, it's a function, and it doesn't pass the horizontal line test. So you didn't have to use a trig function, but that's another one that would work. Okay, I'm going to move on, but as always, if I'm moving on too quickly from this one, I'll give you one more chance at the end. So let me give you a couple minutes here to look at your 3.1 quiz so you can see if there's any questions from that you need to ask. So try to find those in the next few minutes, please.
I turned in physical copies of some assignments for the 3.1 quiz. Do you know if you still have those?
Yeah, I always put them in that box over there by the cell phones. There's one of those is for 4th period. Anything with your name on it, you're welcome to take out of there. Okay, so again, I'm not trying to rush you, but I also don't want to waste your time. So, in a couple minutes. So, same thing. If you do have questions from 3.1, I just need you to tell me the form and the question. Ready?
Form A, question 16.
Number 16. Okay. And I believe this to be the same as number 15 if you had Form B also. So that could help some of you other guys as well. Okay, so to be fair, this is, you know, we hope that you guys remember most of this from Algebra 2 so that, you know, this is more of a review than anything, but there are a few skills in here, such as questions 15 and 16, that you probably didn't do these in Algebra 2, but they are things you need to know. Okay, so before I get into this, again, the best tip I can give you if you struggled with these questions is make sure you know that if you have a number whose exponent goes to 0, it goes to 1. If you have a number whose exponent keeps getting bigger, then that just keeps getting bigger. And if you have a number whose exponent goes to negative infinity, that's like 1 over n to the positive infinity, which is like 1 over infinity, which would be 0. So, I don't know. I feel like 1 and 2 are a little more intuitive. Number 3, not so much. It's good for you to understand why, but it's also beneficial enough that I think you should just memorize it. Okay, so first time I'll plug in positive infinity since that's on the top. Okay, and it's going to look like this. And so I would try to figure out what's going on with this for one step. So we've got a positive divided by a positive, which would be positive. And in a fraction, if your numerator is stuck in place but your denominator keeps getting bigger, this goes to 0. Now, this matches the first thing that I suggest you memorize. If you have a number whose exponent goes to 0, that whole thing goes to 1. So the denominator went to 3, and the fraction goes to -2. Now, for the second half of the question, if I plugged in negative infinity instead, now I have a positive divided by a negative, which would be negative. But because it's 0, 0 is the only number that's the same positive or negative. It's like -1 times 0, which is still 0. So that's still 1, this is still 3, and that's still -2. So you should have got -2 on both of those. Did you see your mistake in there, or do you have something else to ask about it?
I have a question regarding the third rule. If third is 1 over -infinity, that would just be equal to infinity, right?
Well, 1 over -infinity, I would do it this way. I'd say a positive divided by a negative is negative. And if your numerator is stuck still, but your denominator keeps growing, then this goes to 0. So you could say -0, but again, -0 is the same thing as +0. So, but you do need to keep up with the signs. You do need to consider the positive divided by a negative, because sometimes if that exponent becomes positive infinity, you get one thing, but if the exponent becomes negative infinity, you could get something else. It didn't matter in that question, but sometimes it can matter. So, okay, what else from 3.1? Okay, same thing. If I'm moving on too quickly, I will give one more chance after we finish the last one. So if you have not looked back at your 3.2 quiz, please start scanning through that over the next few minutes and figure out which questions you want to ask about. And I set a timer, so let's give this one about 3 or 4 minutes. This one is typically the hardest part for most students. So you probably have a few more questions on this one.